Clinical Trials Project Management Series 2, provided by the Case Western Reserve Clinical Translational Science Collaborative. This series will be presented across 4 modules. Module 3 is Manual of Operations 101. Our objectives for this module are to define and describe the purpose of the Manual of Operations, also known as the MOP, identify key elements of an effective MOP, and share best practices for writing a MOP. What is a Manual of Operations, and what is its purpose in the clinical trial? Shakespeare famously wrote, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players," in his play As You Like It. I'm going to set the scene for the MOP with a theater analogy. A theatrical production involves a lot of people and materials to be successful, just like a clinical trial. Our producers are the stakeholders, the funding agency, and regulations. They're the ones who make the work possible. The PI is the director, overseeing the production, making decisions, and instructing the cast and crew. The project manager is the stage manager. They take the vision of the director and coordinate with the backstage crew and serve as a resource for the cast on stage. The protocol is our script. It gives the cast their lines, describes the scene, and establishes the plot, just as the protocol provides the study design, schedule of events, objectives, and sample size. The cast is our study team, the investigators, research coordinators, and nurses who conduct the study. Backstage, we have the crew, our supporting departments and services, the lab, investigational pharmacy, and clinical areas like the OR. Without the crew, the cast would be on stage, in the dark, without props, and the audience wouldn't be able to hear them without their microphones. The props are our supplies and equipment. What do we need, when, and how do we use it? Where is it stored so we can find it easily? The audience is our subjects. How do they get tickets and where do they go to see the show? Multi-site studies are like a touring production. The same show travels to another theater and performs for audiences in their location. The script has all of the actors' lines and maybe a few notes about what the scene should look like, but it doesn't include instructions on where the lights should go, when they should change, which side of the stage the actors should enter from, etc. That information is decided on by the director, our PI, and those details are captured by the stage manager, our project manager, in the prompt book. This is what the Manual of Operations does for the clinical trial. The protocol gives us the instructions on the study design, visits, and endpoints, but the Manual of Operations gives the additional information and details necessary to operationalize the study. The MOP will ensure that regardless of where the study is performed, it is being conducted uniformly across all sites and within your own institution. For our touring production, if they have the script and the prompt book, another cast and theater can put on the same show. Likewise, if additional sites have the protocol and Manual of Operations, they can conduct the same trial and produce the same quality of data as the lead site. Now that we know what a MOP is, why do you need one? Good clinical practice requires that sponsors have standard operating procedures. All of our institutions have many SOPs, but they can't be specific enough to cover all aspects of conducting our clinical trial. FDA's Bioresearch Monitoring Compliance Program, referred to as BMO, states in their compliance guides for both sponsor and CROs and clinical investigators that they will be looking at policies and procedures to determine compliance with applicable regulations. FDA inspection aside, written instructions are a good idea, plain and simple. They facilitate training for study staff, are a helpful reference as the study progresses, and when followed, ensure a consistent approach to produce consistent results. What elements of study conduct should the MOP address? We know that the Manual of Operations serves as the master project plan, tying together all of the elements of our study. It covers the aspects of conducting the trial that the protocol does not. The protocol provides eligibility criteria, and the MOP will detail how potential subjects will be identified. As an example, let's say that we're going to advertise the study to reach a broader pool of potential subjects. The MOP will provide information about whether ads will be print, radio, TV, or online via social media or website, and include details about the processes required to obtain approval for the advertising plan and content. The MOP should address whether eligibility waivers will be permitted and the process for obtaining approval. If there's a question about whether a potential subject meets inclusion/exclusion, who makes the final decision? The MOP must include details about study processes. If your study involves collecting specimens, what color top tubes and what volumes are needed? How should the specimen be handled? Should it be centrifuged within a certain amount of time? Refrigerated? Frozen? What temperature? For how long? What tests are performed on the samples? Are they to be shipped to a central lab for processing? How should they be packed? Where do they go? Should samples not be shipped on Friday due to lack of weekend operations? What's the process for documenting investigational product accountability? Is there a template that must be used? Who maintains the documents? Don't forget to include your risk management plan. Make sure that the plan is incorporated into the areas of the study where risks were identified. What should be done if an issue goes unresolved for too long? Who should be contacted? What if it still doesn't get resolved? What then? How are adverse events to be reported and to who? How soon after awareness of the event is reporting required? Who is responsible for reporting to the IRB, FDA, funding agency, medical monitor, or DSMB? To that end, the MOP should also include information about who is on the project team and what their role is. Think of it like a delegation log for sponsor responsibilities. We know that communication is vital to the success of the project. How will we make sure our communication is effective? What is the purpose of meeting? Who needs to participate? How often? And what will we talk about? How will we document what's discussed? Any action items and decisions made? Most MOPs include information about an operations committee comprised of the PI, project manager, lead coordinator, research manager, and possibly the data manager or statistician when appropriate. The purpose of this committee is to monitor the progress of the study, manage risks, implement CAPAs when necessary, and generally make decisions that affect the conduct of the trial. Having a set schedule for this committee can help to ensure that the group communicates regularly. Communication is even more critical for multi-site studies. There is no opportunity to pass another member of the team in the hall and give them a quick update or ask a question. Regular contact with participating sites keeps your study on their minds and can improve compliance with the protocol by providing opportunities to ask questions and provide training or sharing best practices. If your study involves a data safety monitoring board, they likely have their own charter. Reference the charter in the MOP. However, if a single individual is acting as the medical monitor, such charter may not exist. So, discussion of reviewing adverse events and other relevant safety information to protect subjects and the process for communicating with the medical monitor should be addressed in the MOP. Yes, communication is crucial, but meeting for the sake of meeting may not add value. Developing a practical communication plan in the MOP will help the team avoid meetings that could have been emails. To illustrate the MOP in action, we'll revisit our case study of a phase 1 trial of a novel PET agent. You recall from Module 1 that the team identified several risks during their assessment, namely the extremely short drug expiry window, documenting the collection time of the arterial blood samples, and clinical management of the arterial line. When it came time to draft the MOP, the team did important pre-work of writing a draft of the process and then testing it out to see whether the plan would work and make any necessary adjustments. Once the team settled on the processes to manage each risk, these plans were incorporated into the MOP. The plan to manage the drug expiry window was written into the section for the investigational agent. The arterial blood sample collection process was written into the lab evaluation and procedures section. And lastly, details on how that arterial line would be managed were included in the study intervention section. Among other things, the MOP also established the form and function of the operations committee, elaborated on the adverse event reporting procedure to ensure that obligations could be met, and fully fleshed out how the arterial blood samples would be processed, as well as the tests to be performed to generate the required data. Having a detailed written plan will help the team avoid preventable errors that would impact the project's objectives, milestones, and subjects' participation. Considering all of the aspects of trial operations that must be addressed, you can see how important the MOP is to the study's success and can begin to imagine how lengthy a document this can be. Lastly, what are some best practices you can employ when writing and implementing a manual of operations? It's an old trope, but don't reinvent the wheel. The purpose of the MOP is to ensure that the study is carried out in an efficient, compliant manner. The study MOP should not deviate from established institutional policies. Rather, leverage those policies to simplify your writing and reinforce existing procedures. It is much more efficient to say that the informed consent process will be conducted in accordance with institutional policy than to write out that policy and procedure in the MOP. In addition to seeking out applicable existing SOPs, it is critical that you name the policy and include a link to it in your MOP in the appropriate section. That way, the information is readily available to the reader. Whether you've been working with the same team or similar studies for years, or find yourself supporting a new group or a unique trial design, it is important to include the team and perhaps other stakeholders when writing the MOP. Leverage your network to get their insight on topics you're less confident on. In addition to asking the team about existing SOPs and practices, consider delegating sections of the MOP to members of the study team with expertise on the topic at hand. Having someone with direct knowledge of the process is efficient, but they shouldn't work in isolation. Have the group review the MOP in sections to maintain focus on the subject. Breaking out the review into bite-sized pieces will make the process less overwhelming and will support the team as they complete their review. Simply sending out the first draft of the MOP with an email asking for feedback will not get the same result. Another reason to take your time and involve the team in reviewing the MOP is to make sure that the document remains grounded in reality. What sounds good on paper doesn't do us any actual good if we can't, or don't, follow what is written. Remember that adherence to policy and procedure is one way that FDA inspectors gauge compliance with regulations. Let's review the key takeaways from today's module. The Manual of Operations provides the details that aren't already included in the protocol. It provides detailed information on how study procedures are to be carried out to ensure consistent data. Essential elements of the MOP include communication plans with information on the composition and purpose of any committees, processes for sharing important information with the study team across all sites, detailed instructions for study procedures. For example, lab tests to be performed, the materials and supplies needed to conduct the study, and the informed consent process. The risk management plan should be embedded in the applicable sections throughout the document. When writing a MOP, some best practices to keep in mind are to reference existing SOPs and procedures. Engage the team throughout the process for both accuracy and time management. Delegate sections of the document to team members with expertise. Lastly, the MOP should be reflective of actual practice so that it fulfills its purpose. Be sure to review the information sheet with important links to references and tools that have been mentioned throughout this series. Thank you so much for joining us for Module 3 of the Clinical Trials Project Management Series 2. Please join us for our final module, Module 4, Monitoring and Data Management Plans 101 and Tools of the Trade.